Welcome to CEBSAR TALK. I am Evans Apia Kisi, the host of CEBSAR TALK. CEBSAR is Center for Better Society Advocacy and Research Africa. CEBSAR Africa is a non-profit organization that believes in a better society for all. We in CEBSAR Africa believe that a better society begins with you and I. Hashtag, a better society begins with me. For more information, please log on to www.cebsarafrica.org. Please follow us on the various social media platforms, YouTube, CEBSAR Talk, Facebook at CEBSAR Africa, Instagram, CEBSAR Africa, and Twitter at CEBSAR Africa. Like always, today we bring you another interesting discussion on our series of Interrogating the Manifestos. Today we focus on finance and economy. Political election manifestos are public declarations of policies and aims of political parties wanting to rule a nation. Given that a manifesto is a social contract that plays a key role in modern democracy and development, we put available manifestos in their place going into election 2020 of Ghana. It is important to note that the discussion is not to pitch one manifesto against the other in terms of superiority, but to look at how the promises address the desired level of development we require as a society. By so doing, we are able to highlight the gaps in these manifestos for a better society. And in this episode of CEBSAR Talk, we focus on finance and economy characterized by monetary policies, fiscal policies, banking, savings, loans, and insurance. And to help us deal with this important issue are Mr. Kwabena Kra. He is a PhD candidate in agricultural and applied economics at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA. He holds Masters in Agricultural and Applied Economics from Mississippi State University, USA, and he holds Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Sciences from the University of Cape Coast, Ghana. Welcome once again to CEBSAR Talk, Mr. Kwabena Kra.
Thank you, Evans. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Great. It's also a pleasure to host you always. And our next guest is Mr. Rexford Kweku Esiama. He's a researcher and economist. He's also currently a PhD candidate in industrial development at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He holds MPhil in economics from the University of Ghana, and he holds BSc in economics from the Central University in Ghana. His research focus includes macroeconomic policy and modeling, industrial policy, innovation, and technology and political economy. Welcome to CEBSAR Talk, Mr. Rexford Kweku Esiama.
Thank you, Evans, for the opportunity. I'm glad to be here.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you, gentlemen. And I must say that we are streaming live on Facebook at CEBSAR Africa, and I'm sure that A.K. Mensah would also be sharing it on his wall together with other people. Before we start the discussion, I must say that in interrogating the manifestos today, unfortunately, our third guest couldn't make it. He would have looked at the independent candidates manifesto, but I'm sure would look a bit of it by asking my panelists here what they think about that. But our focus today will mainly lie on that of the MPP and the NDC. And as I'm told, Mr. Esiama would focus on the MPP's manifesto, and then Kwabnakra would focus on the NDC's manifesto. But of course, they would also be given the opportunity to touch on each of them. But I must say they do not speak or represent these political parties. We are actually here to interrogate, to have an intellectual discourse so that we'll be able to move Ghana forward as one people. So let me start with you. I'll start with you, Mr. Esiama. And the reason we usually do that is because the MPP's manifesto came before the NDC's manifesto, but it has nothing to do with which one perhaps is better or not. So I'll start with you. And for this first round, we just look at some preliminary comments. What do you think, if you look at the manifesto and the section on finance and economy or financial economics, what do you think about it? How do you see the structure? If you can just give us some preliminary comments on the structure, especially touching on some major policies, that addresses economic stability, our monetary policies and the likes. What's your take on the structure of the of the MPP's manifesto as far as financial economics is concerned?
Okay, thank you, Evans. So after studying the presentation made by the MPP, obviously these comments are strictly, in my opinion. So they know what they are doing. I mean, I'll give them that. Any economist who understands the contribution of macroeconomics to development itself generally will be able to appreciate the presentation that the party has put together and what they seek to achieve. In terms of the structure, they focus mainly, their economic policies focus mainly on spurring growth or generating the growth drivers mainly through their industrialization program, which they have started, in this current term that they are in. But aside that, there are also other specific sector-based policies that they hope can drive the growth in the economy, specifically targeting private sector development and bringing in financial sector support. In terms of monetary policy, they can't really take credit for monetary policy because monetary policy is supposed to be independently implemented by the central bank. And that ideally is supposed to be the way things work. So what the governor and his team does should not necessarily be influenced by the government's power. What they do have control over is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy relates largely to the government's handling of tax revenues and expenditures. And they need to balance that to make sure that they do not end up with negative balances on their books. That is what we will call deficits. And the problem with deficits is that the higher the deficits, the lower the fiscal space that the government will have to be able to implement its programs. In other words, the government will be too broke to have enough money to implement the capital expenditure programs that it has identified. And in a few minutes, if you allow the screen sharing, I want to be able to take you through some of the specific arguments that they have put in, and just to talk briefly about, for round one, just to talk briefly about the structure and the specific areas that they focus on.
Go ahead, you can do that, please.
I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Super. Okay, so basically going through this outline, which I think is a focus of our discussion today, the preamble to the analysis on promises is important here because understanding the economic contribution that the government intends to make is hinged on certain fundamental understandings of macroeconomic theory. And that is important and relevant for our debate here. What do I mean by that? There are different approaches to growth, right? Economists generally have different perspectives to how they approach growth, and growth is important because that is the ultimate measure of prosperity. Promises are intended to achieve this in the end, right? So if you study the document, the manifesto document that the government has proposed, they are suggesting all of these things in the end to generate growth and shared prosperity for the people of Ghana, which they believe will be their mandates if they come into power. But briefly, just to highlight three main approaches to growth that have been identified, and this has been done by Gabriel Palmer, who is quite well known in the macroeconomics world. First of all, those that treat growth as sector indifferent and activity indifferent, they actually just believe that, look, the economy will take care of itself. You just allow the markets to work, allow the invisible hand to work. And at a macro level, everything will balance itself. So they do not necessarily concern themselves with specific sector interventions or activity interventions. The second category of people actually are sector indifferent, but then they focus on specific activities. And this traces back to the work of Roma and those who work mainly on the endogenous growth models, because they argue that human capital itself is something that needs to be developed, unlike the earlier group who just said that don't do anything to the economy, let the markets work, people take care of themselves. But in the second group, they are largely saying that, look, you can't just leave markets to work. Technical change, you might assume that the changes, technical progress will evolve itself. But as far as human capital is concerned, the increases in knowledge are what benefits or what contributes stronger to growth than the case where there was no human capital. And then the last group of people are those that view growth as sector specific and activity specific. And these largely relate to those in the post-Keynesian school, Schumpeterian school, and then the structuralist school. This is important because these schools largely refer back to the size and the depth of the manufacturing sector or the productive base of the economy as a growth engine that generates significant value addition. Why is this important? It's important because the productive base of the economy has been argued to be the engine that produces or that generates enough value addition to contribute to growth and make it sustainable. Okay, and this is largely the key argument that is presented in the MPP manifesto. They are focused on implementing policies that would help achieve sustainable growth. So they're right about that. That part is actually excellent, and they present that in a really nice way. It makes interesting. It makes reading interesting. We also need to just to point out one last fundamental point, that there is a structural imbalance with the economy of Ghana, and the government intends to address that point. And that structural imbalance is that there is rather a heavy reliance on imports. Changing that, however, and in my discussion, you will see how the promises intend to address the structural imbalance in the economy. So shall I go on now?
Thank you. No, let's do it this way. I mean, first of all, thank you very much. I mean, that's comprehensive. I mean, what you have said so far. So just looking at the structure of the MPP's manifesto, as far as finance and economy are concerned, you say that the main structure looks very good, looks promising, because it's mainly to achieve sustainable growth. And they look at it mainly from generating growth through their industrialization, where you have walked us through a number of approaches to, these growth theories and the likes. Of course, we would come back to you where we now look at whether in terms of relevance, whether these promises that you have, I mean, at least summarized, that they indeed are positioned in a way to achieve the sustainable growth, whether they consider the very problems that Ghana faces as a country or not. So we'll do that, but let me go to Kwabena first. What's also your take on, in terms of the structure of the NDC's manifesto, and which major policies of financial economics do you feel the manifesto touches?
All right, great, Evans. Thank you, and thank you, Res. Speaking like a macro guy, which is great. So I really like the balance that we have a macro guy and a micro person also around. So I enjoyed his presentations. Were really good. And before I even start or go to the manifesto, I will say that I went back to NDC's 2008 manifesto, just trying to see what has changed and things like that. And I went back because that was the time that they were in opposition and they were trying to come back. So what I saw like an overview, about like 8-page overview of something of their manifesto, which was really short. I went to 2012 to check. It had moved to like 56 pages. 2016 it was like 80 something pages, and now it's about 143. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that the kind of these things that we are doing here actually is pushing them to telling us more, or and not just listening the things that listening stuff for us to just feed on. But now you make a point and you have to elaborate more on it, right? So that we can actually interrogate it and not just give us the promises. So with that being said, I would say that it is good that we are doing this, and it is good that, now the public, we are all speaking, we are all paying attention to what these people these politicians are promising us, and that gives us room to interrogate it properly, okay? So back to the manifesto for 2020, what I can say is, yes, they also do present things in an orderly manner. They touch on the fiscal policies that I'm talking about. I'm talking about expenditures, I'm talking about government revenues, and I'm talking about debt. Okay, they do a good job by highlighting some of the things that they will do. And then in terms of monetary policies, like the Res said, this is not something that they should even be taking credit for, right? Because it is not a political party that's supposed to direct us on that, in that regard. It is the central bank, that's basically the Bank of Ghana, that is supposed to do that job. So if you're talking about inflation and the money supply in the economy and things like that, that is for the, but they talk about it. They say, we're going to make sure that inflation is low. We're going to they make even a point specifically connecting it to the issue of the 100 cedis and 200 cedi notes, that they think that it's going to spark inflation, it's going to push inflation up like that. And so when they come, it is something that they are going to, revisit it and think about it. So overall, I would say, yes, the structure was good. It's good, but a lot of the things that they talk about are like the general thing that everybody will say. I was actually looking for more specific stuff, like, okay, this is what we would do, something that we can critically interrogate. But if you say, we're going to reduce government expenditure, I mean, I want to see the specific things that you're going to do that will reduce it, right? So overall, it's good. The structure is good, and I think when we go into details and talking about what they want to do when it comes to government expenditures and things like that I pick from, I think I will talk about. And what in my view, I think could have also been something that I think they should have captured that wasn't maybe captured. Some basic things that they should have captured that wasn't captured. So that's it. Overall, it was a good thing.
And thank you very much, Mr. Kra, also from your side. So when you look at the NDC's manifesto briefly, you also say it's presented in a very orderly manner, and they do touch on the fiscal policies. You also made a very fundamental point that was made by Rex. So I have a follow-up question for both of you when you say that both parties did talk about monetary policies, which ideally is the duty of the Bank of Ghana. But we know it's also the president also appoints the head of the Bank of Ghana. So what is wrong with it if political parties, do talk about ways of reducing inflation and the likes? And we know these things, they do play major role in winning elections, even though we know usually there's always the question that, well, whether inflation is high or low, the important thing is, does it reflect in the economy? So what is wrong with political parties claiming that they want to reduce, inflation rate and the likes? Maybe I start with you, Rex.
Okay, thanks, Evans. Listen, independent institutions, public institutions must work in the interest of the country. If there are situations where the government controls appointments and things like that, the end result is the generation of some level of bias in favor of the government in power. What that also means is, in the extreme situation where the government feels like they want to take advantage of a system, they can exercise their bias over or control over specific institutions in their favor. Now, in times past, especially in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, inflation had risen to over 100%. It's a similar type of situation that you find in Zimbabwe now. What that means is that the increases in inflation actually reduce the potential of disposable income available for people. So where someone used to buy bread at 5 cedis, because inflation has gone up or has reached, has gone beyond 100%, it is likely that the 5 cedi bread that he bought the day before could have risen to 10 cedis or 20 cedis overnight, right? So inflation itself refers to the rate of rise in prices itself, right? And the potential that prices have to quickly rise. That itself is the problem. But just to focus on what it is you are saying, it is absolutely not ideal when the government goes around taking credit for something that independent institutions should be doing. If it's doing that, that generates itself a certain level of bias that signals to people who are supposed to be having confidence in the economy that no, the government seems to be stepping foot into areas where it doesn't necessarily have control. And then you have a situation like this where they go around making political promises with things that are strictly economic. The reason why this shouldn't be the case is these are macroeconomic indicators. They are informative for managers of the economy to know things that are areas or activities that have gone well and activities that haven't gone well. Do you understand? So what the government really has control over is its fiscal policy, and that largely relates to how it manages its revenue and expenditure. When you do that and you go out there and you speak about how well you have done in closing the fiscal, in reducing the fiscal deficit, and talking more about your capital expenditure and how you think that has created jobs, that is actually a better approach to convince people that you have their welfare at heart. Because the truth of the matter is, the economy itself is not just for we economists who analyze it. It's actually more about the people within the country, those who contribute to 4 main activities: consumption, production, distribution, and exchange. These 4 activities literally make up the economy as we have it.
All right.
The work of the macro policy shouldn't necessarily be related to what government does at all.
All right, thank you very much. Kra, what do you also say to that?
I think the macro guy has spoken, and it'll be like a repetition of what he said, but I will still, come back with that layman's point of view. So when the president, when we say, oh, the president appoints the governor of the Bank of Ghana, it's like the president has also the power to appoint a person to the Supreme Court, right? But then when the person goes to the Supreme Court, you're supposed to be you have that independent mindset to make decisions that benefit everybody in the society. So as the governor of Bank of Ghana, you're basically not, even though you were appointed by the president, you're not supposed to do things that is just maybe to how do I even put it, to just support the president, right? That is in support of the president and not in support of the overall, country. So that is what I think we should understand. We should understand that the governor is supposed to do things that he's overseeing the overall economy in terms of, the money supply in the system, the inflation rate and all those things. So if we allow that to be like, politically influenced, but because I was appointed by the president, that means I have to do things that, only favor or that will favor or what the party faithfuls are saying, that is what I should, yield to. Then you might even end up giving monies to all these party faithfuls. And the more money you release into the system, then you're causing inflation, right? Things are going to, like you said, prices are going to skyrocket. It's going to go up. And we, those that didn't even benefit, we're going to even suffer more. Because already we are poor. We don't even have the money to buy stuff. And now you've released a lot of money into the system because the party faithfuls were asking for more money, right? And so you release and you want to feed them. You push the money to these people, and now these people have money. They're going to, just use it. And we, those who don't even have something that we could have purchased for $1, now we have to, spend $5 on it. When in fact, we've not even improved. Our lives have not even improved. We're not doing anything, and now we have to even cough more dollars to actually do that. So the monetary policy is the central bank is not supposed to be biased. The central bank is supposed to see whatever is happening in the money supply and not yielding to whatever pressure the president gives. But what the party or the government in power has control over is revenue mobilization, how you spend this revenue, and how you deal with the debts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kra and Mr. Siama. So basically, when you talk about monetary policies, we expect that to be in the hands of the central bank and not political parties running about taking credit for reduction in inflation and the likes. And
can I add one thing? So if you can recall, over the years they've been fighting, NDC and PP mostly has been fighting over inflation rate. And sometimes one party would always accuse the other that, hey, it's because the government statistician was appointed by this president, and so they're actually massaging the numbers to churn out numbers that will make you look good, right? But it's supposed to be an independent body that comes out with these numbers, and we will take those numbers. So if there's that huge government influence in there, then we begin to even lose trust, and which is not supposed to be the case, right? It's supposed to be independent bodies doing their jobs in that regard.
All right, thank you very much. So to end on that, we should allow independent bodies to work independently as far as monetary policies are concerned. So let's look at, I come to you, Rex, again. Now you give a very nice, structure of the MPP's manifesto, looks very promising in terms of the relevance. Now it's clear that politicians should focus more on the fiscal policies. So the question I ask is, the fiscal promises, if I should put it that way, how well do you think it addresses our fiscal problems? When you look at the MPP's manifesto, do you find any promises that you feel indeed this is able to address our tax revenue and expenditure issues that you talked about?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So to address your question, I'm just going to show this. I hope that you can see it. So the structure I had mentioned earlier on kind of goes through this approach where the reader is reminded of the work that has been done before, and they talk about the economic policies that they put in place and how they did the macroeconomic management in the earlier parts. But just what is important here is that part 3 to 5 actually focus on what they say that they are going to do, which is to recover the economy from COVID, and then mainly focus on growth acceleration and transformation. That is largely based on digitization and private sector growth. In the course of doing this, they will consolidate investments that they have made during this time so that they can take better charge of the economy. Okay, so they have a wide range of social sector policies. I call them largely subsidies because they are literally just spending on people, and putting that money out there, as opposed to if it was some kind of taxation or something that would have been taking money from them. There are also industrial incentives that they provide, their entrepreneurial programs that they have done already. These are things that they have done during that time. This question, what about exchange rates being problematic? It goes back to what we were saying earlier on. The government cannot take credit for macroeconomic indicators. That itself is problematic, and that isn't something that any government should be focused on. There have been challenges in times past, largely from the pressure on the financial sector and the banking reforms, and then unplanned things like the coronavirus pandemic. But let me just go into the major financial and economic policies. So their idea is to do restoring and maintaining of macroeconomic stability. What this actually means is that they want to make sure that the indicators, the macroeconomic indicators, the fiscal deficits, exchange rates, primary balance, all of those things sit at a level where it can accommodate their fiscal policies and fiscal expenditures. Now, what that actually means is that they are going to be doing a lot of capital expenditure, right? Which will sit in their fiscal policy. All these things you see here, stimulating industrial growth, digitization and public sector reform, stimulating entrepreneurship, all of these things are sitting within their broader fiscal expenditure that they have planned going forward. And all of that largely depends on restoring and maintaining macroeconomic stability. And ideally, that is what it's supposed to be. But monetary policy and macroeconomic stability is supposed to be able to accommodate and absorb all of these planned expenditures that they intend. Okay. So I'm going to expatiate a bit on that, and then later and towards the end of the program, I'll tell you some specific gaps that I have identified, which I think they should be considered by voters and people who are interested in voting. In terms of specific policies, again, the other aspect of fiscal policy, not just expenditure, is also a revenue matter. So they are planning to widen the tax base, simplify compliance, and improve collection of tax revenues. Okay, I mentioned that there are issues regarding debt sustainability. I'll explain that later. But apart from this part, which is the first point, which talks about the revenue issues and trying to widen the tax net and those things, all these other things, industrialization and import substitution, are largely from a fiscal expense point of view. Okay, so they have, in the end, you realize that going forward, the next government that comes will have a large section on fiscal expenses. Then when the time comes to talk about fiscal revenue, you actually see whatever it is that they are going to present. But however, the main arguments that this government is proposing is that these things, widening the tax base, simplifying compliance, and improving collection, are largely based on their digitization policy here, their digital ID systems. And they feel that, look, if you are going to be able to collect revenue from people within the economy, you need to know who is paying you. You need to be able to identify where the monies are coming from, which sectors are contributing. to the pool of funds. Well, largely government uses the consolidated fund as its revenue base to collect all of the monies from its agencies across the country. So the digital ID system is supposed to serve that purpose, covered with the expenditure side. If they have a smooth digital ID implementation, they are able to know where the revenue is coming from. At the same time, they are able to see who they are going to spend on by rolling out some of these social programs and these things. Now, when you put that one aside, the other concern is how they are going to fund it. So their proposal is that they are going to fund their fiscal expenditure largely from the domestic financial sector, which they say they have reformed, and they expect that this sector will bring in or crowd in 70% of this program they call the CARES program, which is largely the basis on which they are going to be rolling out their fiscal expenditures. If they are given the mandate in the future. So I'll just end it here, and because we'll get to a section where we'll talk about feasibility.
Sure.
But largely, this approach essentially involves taking a wealth of fiscal expenditures and basing it on the fact that you are able to identify people, right, within the economy through a digital system who can contribute revenue to you, and based on whose information you can roll out fiscal expenditures. The promises do not necessarily say the end result because it's difficult to tell. And by the end result, I mean the fiscal deficit that will be left at the end of their actions, right? So the document is not clear on the expected gap between revenues and expenditures at the end of their next step. Should they get what the money that they are looking for? Already, they have said in the earlier part of the proposal of their documents that they have been successful at reducing the budget deficits and reducing the fiscal deficits. So we know that, okay, they are saying that while they did well, revenue went up and they didn't spend so much. So in the end, what they have is a positive balance. And their current account shows that. So it looks like, at a macroeconomic level, there's enough money in terms of reserves at the central bank that can cater for us. That's literally what they're saying now. But in terms of their promises going forward, it is not clear what the situation is. And that's another point that critical people need to take into consideration. Okay. So largely that is the picture that their policy is presenting.
All right, thank you very much. And you started again with the fact that government must not take credit for these macroeconomic indicators. And for you also, by and large, in terms of relevance, the MPP's promises look good. I mean, in terms of how to be able to move the economy to a sustainable level. But I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. I mean, to the layman, when we talk about fiscal policies, you indeed talked about not only taxes, but also revenue and expenditure. And one of the key things they want to do is to widen the tax base, as you said. But in another breath, they also talk about tax incentives. To the lay person, how does that work? If you want to, because we know it's one of our problems in Ghana, the fact that quite a lot of people do not pay tax because they are not captured in the tax base or whatever. Yet the few that pay taxes also, we want to give them tax incentives. Does it work? How does that work for you?
Okay, just to be as objective as possible, the tax base and the size of the tax base actually needs to be increased, because if they don't do that, they probably will not get the expected revenue that they may need to use to fund their intended programs. Okay, so why is revenue important? Okay, and do people even know that they have to pay tax at all? Tax itself tax is actually one of the main sources of government revenue. There are other sources like royalties and mineral rents that they get from companies that are mining within the country. But the tax is the main source because that's actually easier to collect. And everybody in the economy actually pays tax one way or the other. So, especially with the indirect tax, most people don't even know that you paid. So if you go to a supermarket and you purchase an item, there is VAT on that. You pay tax, right? There's an NHIS percentage on that. You've paid tax to the government. Okay. Then there's also direct tax, which is those who are in the formal sector, those who are in the civil service, and anyone whose salary information is captured on a SNIT system or the controller and accountant general system. You're going to the formal process. That's actually direct tax. The problem, however, maybe I risk sounding a bit political here, but it's important. You see, during these times when the parties are campaigning, they are not necessarily reminding people that, look, you're actually supposed to be giving me the money so that I can use it to do this for you. They are campaigning and telling people that we are going to do this for you, right? We are going to spend this money on so and so to do this for you so that your lives will be better. So in the end, I think that the net effect of that is that you actually have people who are not thinking that they actually have to pay tax for some of these things to work, which is why that is important. And that brings up the issue of incentives. Because if people are not encouraged to pay the tax to contribute to the development to the development of the economy in which they actually live, they have incentives to spend their money elsewhere. Their income that they earn can be saved or spent. And the truth of the matter is, in any economy, you actually need to spend to drive production. You actually have to spend something to encourage suppliers and producers to want to produce more so that people can demand those things. And eventually you have, it contributes better to your GDP. So it actually works fine that the government is saying that they're going to give incentives out to people. The problem is which people are they giving the incentives to? And that is where the widening of the tax net comes in. Because those who actually pay the tax now in the formal sector, the last time I checked the figures, I don't think that they are even up to 50% of the entire working population. Already, the informal sector in Ghana is close to about 80% of the labor force, right? And by the labor force, we are actually referring to those who are able-bodied, who are able to work and contribute towards production in the economy. Okay, and remember that I said that production is one of the main activities in the economy, along with consumption, distribution, and exchange. So if you have people who contribute to the production aspect, those are the same people who are also going to contribute to the consumption aspects, the distribution, and the exchange aspect. Now, all of this is built on a model that is called the circular flow of income. Right?
All right.
That analysis going forward, that talking about that is actually going to take too long.
Yeah, sure.
That's the theoretical aspect of this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isiama. So I come to you, Kwabnakra, with the NDC's manifesto also. I mean, you also already gave a very nice structure that is presented where they seem to touch, of course, on a lot of the fiscal policy. So the same question in terms of relevance, which promises in the manifesto do you feel, answer the pressing financial problems that we have in Ghana?
Well, thank you, Ivan, once again, and Rest, thanks for expatiating on the points. So I don't know if, in terms of things solving financial problems in Ghana, I don't really specifically know which aspect you're talking about, but let me take how they went about. Yes. Maybe, so basically,
yeah, maybe just to say, also following up from what Rex said, for example, in terms of revenue mobilization and also
okay.
expenditure.
So basically, the main strategy, their main focus is on that, like revenue mobilization, and then they talk about expenditures, like how they're going to reduce government spending and things like that. But they list 5 main strategies, which I think it will just intertwine, it will interconnect with what Res has already said. But they said the first point will be to broaden the tax base with while containing tax rates. That's, say we'll broaden the tax base, and then we'll maintain the rate. We're not going to increase anything, but we will broaden it, right? So we want to really see more about it. Like, how exactly are you going to achieve that? Are you going to, reach out to more people to pay taxes? That is what, as somebody who is looking at this thing with critical eyes, that is what I'm looking out for. That specific things that you do, that you would, and those ones I must say, and I'm not a political pundit here, but I must say that this is something that I was expecting to see more. What they do here is not, enough. I think going forward, they should try and stress on the specifics, like the specific things that you do. But just saying, oh, we'll do that, we'll broaden the tax base is not enough. They do touch on certain things, but what I was expecting wasn't really, it. And then they're saying that they will reduce discretionary tax exemptions, right? So some companies and some institutions or some individuals or some agencies are actually giving some exemptions from some taxes, right? And they're saying that they will try and reduce that. Why? Because they want to get more money. So now they are not going to let a lot of people or a lot of agents, a lot of companies enjoy from that. And they will say they come back to improve tax collection, which is basically in line with the second one. And then they will rationalize expenditures, right? They're going to be rationalizing expenditures, which is basically trying to reduce or somehow spend government money, which is spend the taxes prudently. So that these are the main things that they highlight, and they spend time to talk about it. So they're saying they will improve operations in domestic tax offices and customs entry points, trying to create close loopholes and things like that to just make sure that people who are supposed to pay taxes would do that. But what I think was maybe missing, and maybe this could have probably be my concluding remark or something, but I don't want it to be buried, right? Because we are discussing things here, so I need to bring that up. If you're talking about broadening the tax base, as you rightly said, so few people that directly pay taxes. Like for indirect taxes, we all pay, as you buy water, you buy whatever, you're paying. One thing that I was hoping that will be captured, and it's already been started, is the fact that you try to formalize the economy. I don't want to use the term formalize, because when you say that, people begin to think, oh, are you making it too educational or things like that. But you try to, make sure these identification, the national identification stuff that people are doing, it's good. Everybody has it. We can actually use that to track people. You want to also reduce you want to reduce the amount of money that people spend in registering their businesses, right? Because it is only when I formalize my business that you can actually keep track of me to come and collect your money. Okay, so if the ID cards and this registration of businesses is really easy for everybody to do, people would be, you'll be happy to just go and register their business. That way you can capture a lot of people to track, formally even track, if you are not even going to focus on so much on the people that are not captured in the government system, that you can actually pay directly take monies from them. That I thought was something that could have been captured here. If we are able to have a centralized, like a system that captures individuals, like the national identification card that is already in place, make sure that that is something that we are done. And as the moment a child is, being born or whatever, we keep track of the person, and whatever job the person takes, we will be able to, follow that. Other than that, it will be the very few people who are paying the taxes that you're going to burden them with, more money, right? But when you do that, they will try to, always find ways not to report whatever they are doing. So that was something that I was expecting. It was a bit fundamental thing that I was expecting to be captured, but it wasn't. But they actually talked about that. And then in terms of expenditure, like government spending, they're talking about they will realign public expenditure to high growth inducing areas while emphasizing social protection such as free primary healthcare and like that. As Rex said, as a government you need to spend, right? You need to spend, but they're saying that they are going to spend prudently. But then the question that I ask myself is, were they doing that when they were in power, right? Because if you had the opportunity and you probably did not do something like this, and now you're going to say you're going to do it, is it something that I should, take to be credible? Is this something that I should hold you accountable to? Yeah. And then they talk about, so of course they're going to spend this money, build roads, make sure the health sector is working and all that, put the monies into the system so that it will stimulate growth. And they also, one thing that they also mention, or they also talk about, is the fact that they will try to reduce the budget deficit. And it comes back to government expenditures. Okay, because you don't want to really spend more when your revenue is less. Because the deficit that we're talking about is basically the fact that our revenues are less than our expenditures. We spend more than we are able to generate. So they're saying, oh, we will make sure that we're going to reduce, that's a promise that they're saying, that they are making, that they're going to reduce the deficit. And expenditure measures, I think, yeah, that's pretty much. I don't want to really repeat some of the things that
has been said already.
Yeah. So your tax measures, yeah. And the one thing about also tax that they're saying, they're going to cut taxes for some jobs, right? They will cut taxes for tax cuts for jobs. So like Res has already mentioned, that you're saying you want to mobilize more money, but then you're saying, oh, you want to cut taxes. It cuts both ways. If you're cutting taxes, you're basically trying to empower those businesses to, to have that financial freedom to be able to employ more hands, so that when a lot of people are employed, they also pay taxes. Right? But that only happens when the business is registered nicely, correctly, and there's everything could be tracked. It's not like I registered this business, but then I do a lot of things sideways, right? So you make the things flexible for people to just register and be, as honest as they can, so that you can know the number of people that are being employed in, and formally you will be taking your taxes from that. So it's a good thing, but this is something that you just don't say, but you have to carefully, craft it in a way that you would understand that, hey, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. And then we can weigh the two and say, okay, then go this way, because this seems to be the one that is going to generate the most, benefit. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kra. So pretty much the same with regards to the NDC's manifesto also. Their main aim of revenue mobilization through widening the tax base is something that perhaps would be able to address our financial problems. But I just wanted to ask you a follow-up question. I mean, you touched on the expenditure and the NDCs. It's also much talked about their big push agenda of about the 10 billion of the 10 billion.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Is it how do you juxtapose that also with their fiscal policies, the promises? If they want to spend this quite huge, is it? I know we'll come to the feasibility aspect and probably you might look at it, but what's your take on that briefly on their big push agenda?
It is. Thank you. I think it's hard to to not just even interrogate the feasibility now, because anything that stimulate the economy is good. 10 billion, that's decent amount to create more opportunities, to create jobs for people to do. that's going to help. It has a lot of, if I give you $100 today and you spend it, it's going to generate a lot of indirect benefits to people. So it's, on the surface, I would say, well, it's good. But then you also, here's the case that you're also talking about reducing budget deficit, reducing, government expenditure and all that. How are you going to generate that 10 billion without necessarily going to borrow? Because we're trying to, reduce borrowing, excessive borrowing. That's what we're trying to reduce, right? So if you say you're going to give 10 billion, I support it. It's a great idea. You're going to, facilitate, you're going to boost the economy. People are going to, work. Armed robbery and all those things are going to reduce, because now a lot of people will be working other than going to use the shortcut to make money. But it comes back to you showing me how you're going to generate that revenue, and that is basically what they've stated. They've talked about in their the revenue collection process, which is basically, it has to do with taxes, right? It just have to do with taxes. And one thing that I also, again, I don't want it to be buried is the idea of formalizing the economy, so that if you formalize the economy for policies or programs such as the health insurance, the free SHS that is already going on, you will see that if the economy is formalized and we are able to identify people who are above certain income brackets, you can actually exclude that. I know some people will oppose this or will object to this, but that's my view, that you can take away some people, you can take out some people who are above certain income threshold, because a lot of people can take care of their children, right? So when you do those things, you can save. It might not be, a huge chunk of money, but these are ways of, cutting down expenses, generating maybe money, because you would have used that money for something else, but now you can push that money to something. Of course, this is my concluding this thing, but I also didn't want it to be buried, because we're talking about
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kwabnakra. So thank you also, Mr. Rex Esiama. If you are joining us live on Facebook, this is CEBSAR Talk, and today we are interrogating the manifestos as usual, a focus on finance and economy. And our guests have been Mr. Kwabnakra and Mr. Rex Esiama. So as introduced earlier on, Mr. Esiama focuses on the NPP's manifesto and Kwabnakra focuses on the NDC's manifesto. But I have to say that they do not represent or speak for these political parties. We are having an intellectual discourse to be able to see how best to move Ghana forward. So I will come to the second round quickly, where we look at feasibility and impact. And again, I start with you, Mr. Esiama. I mean, you have lectured us a lot, but what do you think? I mean, the promises that you've talked about, I mean, there are ways of, mobilizing revenue, the government expenditure, making reference to the MPP's manifesto. Can you point out to some promises that you feel these indeed is feasible, is doable, and vice versa? And then you could also add to it, what would be the impact? I mean, these promises in order to ensure economic stability that they talk about. Is this something that is feasible? And what will be the end result? Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So, Kwabena, kind of also brings in some interesting points. Just to advise everyone who's listening, because this is also educative, you see that the policies are quite similar. They're also talking about, digitization, identification, expanding the tax base, and then also spending an amount. I think that the critical point to look out for is who is able to bring us value for money and spends, cost effectively to achieve maximum results. So now let me talk about the feasibility issue and just point this out now. So based on the review that I did, I realized that the feasibility and here we can look at feasibility in terms of being able to practically implement these things, and then also look at feasibility in terms of the contribution to the overall goal, which is growth and shared prosperity for the people, right?
Yeah.
So feasibility here lies largely on their economic and industrialization policies. And by industrialization policies, Kwabena has mentioned that for the NDC, which is a $10 billion big push, the MPP also have theirs. They have their own social spending. They have their one district, one factory. They have all of those, all of those policies that are already known in the public about their tenure. The poverty eradication, one village, one dam, all of those things in different ways contribute towards the broader industrialization goal, right? And I don't know if that information is publicly available, but maybe sometimes someone may need to look at the total cost of running all of those programs, just to see if that is also $10 billion or is more or less. Then in that case, we can do the value for money analysis from them. So feasibility, widening the tax base, improving compliance, and those things are actually things that can be done, that can be implemented, because the government currently has already put in place steps to identify people. So those systems have been put in place. It actually must continue, irrespective of who wins or who doesn't win. I think both of the camps have that approach in mind, to identify people so that they can tax them, so that they can give them incentives, and that is something that must continue. But the industrialization part is a part where I think we should take a bit of caution on in terms of feasibility, because it's a big investment. It takes time. Industrialization itself takes time, because you go through an initial period of learning, whether it is by doing or by importing technology or whatever it is. You go through an initial period of learning, and then you get to a stage where you are doing import substitution and those things. And then export orientation. Now, let me just go for it. I think I point out some of these things. So feasibility across sectors, there's energy, there are energy issues, increasing efficiency there, ensuring value for money through loss reduction targets and improving revenue collection. These are things that can easily be done. Why? Because they require the political will of the government to ensure that the energy that is generated is used effectively. There are debates in the energy sector already about excess capacity that the country has, and why the power is still going off, all of these things, and whether the distributor has enough infrastructure. Those debates are already there. Fiscal infrastructure, obviously the government needs to spend to put on capital projects, roads, highways, railways, water, sanitation. Those things can be done. The extent to which they can be done, however, is largely the problem. So in times past, you have heard during campaigns, the government says they're going to build 100 hospitals, 100-bed facility across the country, and all of those things. Look, irrespective of the architecture or whatever type of infrastructure that you put in your country, you need to be able to ensure that you have the funds to provide it. I would rather they come and tell us that, look, based on the macroeconomic position that the country is in and the expectations and projections that we make, we can afford to do some roads, some highways, some railways, maybe 10 of each or 5 of each. Those are things that you actually know that you can do. Don't come and say 100 in the end, and then the time comes to assess and you've only done 20 and you have a different explanation for that, Anyway, so like I said, industrialization is a big deal. It requires massive spending, and that itself can be done. The extent to which it can be done, however, is what needs to be reviewed. The digitization aspect of the economy is useful to identify, and I think that that's actually something that should be the starting point. If there's any of the expenditures that they want to focus on, for me personally, in my opinion, I think they should just focus on this digitization and get it right? And consolidate all the databases across all the public agencies. It doesn't make sense that Senate is collecting data, NIA is collecting data, DVLA is collecting data. That type of duplication across public agencies is actually really another source of revenue leakage, because that really doesn't help anyone. In terms of private sector development, they are going to be focusing on developing agric industry and trade, especially because of the continental free trade agreements. My perspective on the Continental Free Trade Agreement is good that we have the Secretariat, but in the beginning when I started this presentation, I mentioned that there's an approach to growth which is sector specific and activity specific, and that is largely based on the structure of the economy. What that means for trade is that you cannot trade with a developed country that already has a large productive base and has come into the market with it. As a small open economy, our approach to trade should be more of taking caution and protecting our local industries to ensure that they have the capacity to go out there and trade. So if we have, yes, it's good that we have we signed the agreement and here we will go into trade, but we must be cautious about how our productive base responds to this. And that goes back to the issue of industrialization, which the government says that they are going to address. The other thing is the cost of power, access to and cost of finance, and that's largely on the financial sector. But then that's also based on the digital ID, the digitization of the economy, which itself is important. Increasing access to and cost of finance will improve the business environment, and that's also something that is feasible to do if they get the ID system right. And there's also local content reforms along the supply chain and services chain and capacity development for local content. In terms of the supposed impact and the feasibility of the policies, it's too early to say because there are actually stronger factors that can prevent these policies from actually being fruitful. I mentioned the political economy and unplanned circumstances here because this economy is actually gradually recovering from something that was unplanned, which is the pandemic. At the beginning of 2019, nobody even knew that there was something called COVID that was going to show up. It has showed up, and its effects, have been documented on this economy. Actually, the NPP manifesto captures it, and that is what they intend to use their CARES program for, to give out, more support to businesses and to individuals and to create jobs and those things. I will speak about some of those things in my conclusion anyway. So there are challenges, and it's too early to say whether the policies that have been outlined have the full transformation that is needed, because already I said that industrialization takes time. We need to go through a stage of learning. It's too early to say now whether the policies will have an effect. We need to, and by just to mention this, the political economy here I refer to largely relates to the way in which the political parties conduct themselves, especially those that win power. There are issues of corruption, poor public administration that come up when a government sets off on its term. Some of those things can greatly influence the extent to which some of these policies work or not. For example, we have seen in times past that certain job-related programs like the JIDA and the SADA and all of those things, didn't work as much as we expected. Now, the outcome of some of those things could be traced largely to the political economy of the workings of the government in power. Who gave out those contracts? Where was the monitoring done? Has the person who claimed to, who has been alleged to have defaulted, has the person been brought to book? Have they returned the money that they were given? All of these things are discussions that are supposed to be had. So if now we are going into a season where new promises are being made, how are we sure that if a new government comes into power, they are not going to make the same mistakes with contracting and giving out things to people within their political circles? And the same problems will be generated because of corruption and familiarity and all of those associated issues. So let me just end it here, and then later on we can just talk about the conclusions and the gaps that I have identified.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Isiama. I must say that was a bit long, so it might be a bit difficult for me to summarize. But I get the impression that for you, if you look at the MPP's manifesto, by and large, it's it's feasible, it's achievable, and one of the things that would determine that, or one of the factors would be the political economy, where you talk briefly about corruption, and I guess also the political will, and also in terms of achieving it, you hold the view that if they are able to focus more on what they have started in terms of the digitization, this would be key, and consolidation of the various data collection approaches that we are doing. We seem to have too many, so if we could consolidate this, I think Kwabena also made this earlier on, where he looked at it from, let's say, formalization point of view. I think we need to be able to get this thing right as far as digitization, trying to be able to digitize the economy. And we know that's what the MPP indeed have started, and we hope that whoever wins power will take this thing serious. Thank you very much, Mr. Siama. So I come to you, Kwabena. Same question. When you look at the NDC's manifesto, which points, which promises do you feel that, this is feasible, this is achievable, and what would you suspect the intended impact to be if these things are indeed realized?
Oh, great. Broadly speaking, a lot of their strategies revolves around, revenue mobilization, which is basically everything comes back to taxation, to taxes, right?
Yeah.
And saying you broaden tax base while containing the tax rates. This is something that you can do, because it's just like the political will, right? But then if you ask yourself, if you look at the current state relative to what you're going to, what you're going to do, is it something that's going to help, right? Is it going to help? If you're going to broaden it, you want to keep, have you put the measures in place? Do we have the measures in place to ensure that we can actually broaden the tax base? And it comes back to the earlier point that we've made, that until we try to identify where the revenue is coming from, we know, but until we are able to expand that, do we have that digitized stuff that we can actually reach out to a lot of people to collect that? Maybe not. We can say it, maybe not. I think it's doable, but before this could be achieved, we should focus on the primary point, digitization. Try to identify potential people that can pay taxes, and not just put the burden on the very few people who are actually paying the taxes. Now, moving back from there to they're saying rationalize expenditures. This is something, if you say rationalize expenditures, what exactly, or what specific thing are you talking about, right? Is it that you're thinking about, oh, I'm going to focus on spending the government generated funds on this and not on that? So it is not, that promise, I would say, it's not extremely clear, like extensively clear to me what they mean by rationalize expenditures. They're going to say, in terms of taxes, again, they're saying we're going to cut taxes for jobs. And they have made a promise here that they're going to reduce corporate income tax for medium-sized companies, from 25% to 15%. So if the current rate is 25% and you're going to reduce it to 15%, is it doable? Yes. I mean, it takes the political will to do that, right? But is it going to generate something that will be more than what we are achieving with the current 25%? That is still a big question, which needs extensive data, extensive interrogation to really understand that if this would, achieve the intended purpose. So we really wanted to see more, elaborations on that, like comparisons. Okay, yeah, these people have actually practiced this, reduce the rate is here, and this is the benefit, the rate is there. So as it stands now, if you ask me, can they do it? Yeah, takes the political will. Are they going to do it? Maybe. But will it yield benefits that is more than the current benefit that we are experiencing, given that we have it at 25%. He's saying newly established medium-sized companies that employ up to 20 staff will be exempted entirely from the payment of corporate income tax for 2 years. So tax exemptions again. This is doable. It only takes the political will, right? They say, oh well, we're going to give them tax exemptions. But you ask yourself, if you give the companies, those emerging companies, that tax exemptions, will the benefit that you are hoping or you're seeking to achieve, would you get it? Are they going to employ people that you can keep track of, that you can take money from them, or they will just generate the money and you hope that by 2 years they would have employed more people? At least even if the government cannot reach out to a lot, we would have reached a lot more people. So it's doable. It only takes the political will, but as relative to whether it will generate the benefit that we all are hoping that it will be better than the benefit that we are seeing now, that is too early to call. We cannot talk in that regard. Let me see if I can find newly established companies that employ more than 20 staff will be exempted entirely from. Oh, I think that's what. Oh, that means it's like a repetition or something. What else? Let's go back and see what has become. So yeah, in general, I would say some of the things that they talk about is doable. But then that takes me to that $10 billion, to infrastructure. Do we have the 10 billion to do that? If we have it, yes, we can construct. We can ensure that the distance, the road linking Tema, Accra, Cape Coast, Kumasi, all these major roads are being linked up. If you have the money to give to contractors to ensure that everything is in order, they will do it. But how will this money be generated? Here's the case that we're talking about. If you look at it from this perspective, without thinking about taxes or where government is generating their monies and all that, you will see like, oh, 10 billion, that is good. The folks in the construction sector they'll be happy, and they'll be like, oh, we want NDC to be in power. When they come, we're going to get 10 billion. And that guy who helps with building roads and stuff like that, they're going to be happy, right? But you ask yourself, how would this 10 billion be generated? Is it something that you're just going to add to the debt, or you're going to get this from the taxes? Because if you're going to raise tax to fund this, then the benefit that we're going to get from this should be more than that. And that comes back to, are we as a nation, are we really financially prudent when we actually in our expenses, when we are spending? Do we put emphasis on value for money and things like that? And that is something that we've actually struggled with, right? We always complain that government funded projects are excessively high. If you take a 6-unit classroom block that the government will build relative to what MTN will build, the cost of doing this too, the gap is so wide. Are we doing that? Are we doing that? So what I wanted to see is where the money was going to come from. Now that you're going to cut taxes, you're going to, cut tax rates, maintain tax rates, and even give tax exemptions to some medium-sized companies. And you're still talking about reducing budget deficits, but we are still talking about raising 10 billion to fund major roads and to complete projects. How is that going to be achieved? So in terms of the taxes, their measures for collecting, their tax measures, I would say yes, everything that they've indicated here is something that is doable. But in terms of whether it's going to generate benefits that will be more than or better than what we have now, it is too early to call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kwabnakra. Also, again, pretty much the same. If you look at that of the MPP and the NDCs, and you also say by and large that these things are indeed achievable. Also, the same point, if we are able to digitize our economy very well and consolidate our databases, we think we'll get there. But I'll read some few comments. There might be some questions in them, and then come back to you to hear your view on what about the expenditure, because as you explain about the fiscal policies, it's pretty much about, you know, revenue and expenditure. And if digitization is able to help us, you know, get more revenue, as you've both explained brilliantly, what about the expenditure? Apart from the corruption bit that you talk about, is there something that we could also do and say that, oh, if various governments do this, this could also help us to be able to hold them accountable as far as their expenditure is concerned? Because I think by and large, these two variables, I guess later, there might be other variables, indeed add up to the fiscal deficit that has already been explained. So we have a comment here. It's pretty much long, but I'll try and read off from our own Michael Edujemf. He says, formalization of the economy has been one of the underpinning benefits of the national identification system and the digitization agenda. The alignment of the two begins the process of formalization of the economy. Also has been the mobile money interoperability, which is in force, which is basically indirectly widening the number of citizens with bank accounts, another good indicator of a formalized economy. So I guess it's adding on to the formalization of the economy that we are talking about. He again goes on to say, what is the concept of discretionary tax exemptions? I thought all such exemptions are subject to parliamentary approval, so may not be necessarily discretional. I don't know who said that, but maybe one of you could respond to that. What is the concept of these discretionary tax? But as you do that, again, maybe I start with Esiama. He's asking the concept of discretionary tax. But as you do that, the way both of you have carved a very nice way of, you know, the revenue mobilization, I would say, if we are able to digitize our economy. Of course, Esiama adds a lot of things that could be done to help this. But one key message here is the digitization of our economy. What about the expenditure part? Is there something you think that if various governments do, you know, it could also help to, I don't know, whether to make them more accountable or in order to reduce the deficits that we all hope to achieve? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I guess I'm answering the question about the discretionary tax before I talk about what it is. Okay, so from a management perspective, right? If you have different categories of economic agents contributing to your tax base and your tax revenue, you want to be able to ensure that this is sustainable and that people keep paying their taxes. Okay, so especially for large firms and corporations and those whom you are inviting, you know, people at the export promotion centers and investment promotion centers actually go out there to incentivize firms to come into Ghana to come and do business. Those people like firms like that and economic agents like that who come into the country are giving these type of discretionary tax incentives so that they can stay here and do business, as opposed to coming to South Africa or going to Madagascar or going somewhere else. That will give them better incentives to stay. The other part of it is that if you give out the incentives, the question is what happens? How do they handle their profits at the end of it? Do they pay you a certain percentage, which Kwabena was talking about in terms of corporate tax on their incomes, or these incentives are such that they have the ability and they have the will to carry all of the money away back to their home countries or their home economies? When that happens, well, we refer to that as capital flight, the movement back and forth of capital, which is being repatriated by companies and firms and individuals who have come to work in the country and are sending their money back. The issue of remittances and its effect on growth is still an empirical matter. Even for economists, because it's not something that you can determine beforehand. That's because you are giving these incentives, there will be slower remittances or faster remittances, and that the effect will be positive or negative. You can't tell that. But basically, the issue about incentives, the discretionary tax incentives, is that you want to be able to encourage further investment in your economy. by large corporations and multinationals, because when they come, there is something called, there is an effect we call agglomeration economies. Agglomeration economies are basically associated benefits and effects that come because of the movement of large corporations. So if a large corporation like Shell comes in, they will come along with people who they do business with to come into Ghana to come and set up offices and employ people and all of those things. If you want these companies to stay, you must give them incentives. You must bait them.
All right.
Incentives.
I'm afraid that we would have to end it here. I know you have a lot in you that you would want to give. Thank you very much, Mr. Siama. But still, when I come to you for your concluding remark, please, I know the question is not so clear, but is there a way that, governments, we've said that digitization, and I'm repeating myself again, as a way to be able to improve on this tax if we want to widen the tax base. What about the expenditure bit? I mean, is there something that we can place our hand on and say that if governments do this, this could also help the expenditure bit? Because we don't have enough time, you do that in addition with your concluding remark.
Sure, I'll do that.
I guess that let's start with a concluding remark or you want to say something about the discretionary tax?
Yeah, I mean, I think Res took us through, elaborating on that. But what I'm saying is we don't even have to put so much emphasis on, the discrimination or whatever of it. We should stress the point that you're saying there will be tax exemptions, right? To just facilitate or allow more people or incentivize people or companies to come in to work. That's the whole point. You're giving incentive, but if you give the incentive, it comes back to the point. You incentivize them by not, making them pay those taxes. Does it generate the result that you were seeking to or you were hoping to, right? So I think that should be the fundamental thing that we'll take from it, that your tax exemptions, is it going to yield the benefit, right? It's something that you can do, but is it going to yield the benefit? So I wouldn't talk. And then you say, as you add my concluding remark.
Yes, so good ending there, that whether these tax exemptions are indeed going to give us the
benefit,
benefits.
I think that's what we should be focusing more on. In terms of my concluding remarks, whilst we're even talking, like I said, I just chipped in those things, and I think Res also talked about that. One is that we should make sure that, by all means, we should make sure that we get that formalization of the economy done. We have one identification system. The moment a child is born or a kid is born, you have your unique number, and that number should be with you, and you should use that for everything. That is what is going to, help. Now, with that in place, you can actually track people, right? When people are even taking loans, and you can actually use that to track that. Because here in the US, when somebody maybe have your social security number or something, they enter that and it pulls up a lot of things. And I'm sure that in Europe, you also have the same thing, right? So that is something that we cannot afford not to do. We should make sure that we have that. And once we have that, the tax, increase of the tax base or whatever, we can actually, track a lot of people and, get them to even to pay taxes. And also, once you have that, it comes back to my point that I've always been talking about. And I think I shared this with Albert a long time ago, that this concept of, free SHS, health insurance and all that, but everybody benefits from it. It is good. I support that 100%. But I think that we can even reduce the expenditure or how much money that we invest in that by tapping or taking advantage of this digitized economy, when we can actually track everybody. Once we are able to know who your Evans is, and we are able to know how much you are making in a year or in a month, we can have some, we can build a consensus that, hey, if somebody meets this income threshold, or anybody that is above this income threshold, if your son or your daughter is going to high school, that person is not supposed to benefit from that because you can afford, right? That way, the government can also, save some money. It might not be big, but trust me, it will be a significant amount of money that could be invested in something else other than the free agent. So it will be running, and at the same time, you wouldn't be spending that huge sums of money. So assuming now you're spending $2 billion and you have that in place, you'll be maybe spending 1.5 billion. You think that $500 million is nothing as a country, but it's something. Trust me, it can be invested in a lot of things. So we should, rethink about how we finance these things. And once we have we formalize the system, and everybody can be uniquely identified, and we can be tracked. You can be tracked, and we know what exactly you're doing. We can put some laws. It will be subject to debate. I mean, what should be the threshold be? But that's a different question for another day. But I think these are some of the things that the digitization of the economy could actually help, and giving individuals unique identifications can help, and also making sure that making sure that the process that individuals go through to register their businesses are really, straightforward. It's really simple, not like shoddy, but simple, so that it will not frustrate a lot of people that prevents them from registering their businesses. Because when more people register, you can actually you get taxes from these things, and use that to finance your government staffs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kwabnakra. And I must say that you hit the nail right on the head. So if we're able to digitize our economy, it's not only going to help, widen the tax base as we hope to achieve, but it would also help us to be able to do proper targeting of people who are indeed in need of the freebies that our governments offer, so that we can deal away with this wholesomeness. And I guess this is one point that I also agreed with the finance minister when he said if we had data, we could have targeted instead of, running the wholesomeness. Thank you very much for bringing in that perspective. And I come to you, Mr. Siama. Also, what's your concluding remark?
Okay, thanks, Evans. So, Kwabna has spoken a lot on the digitization, which is actually good. What I do want to bring in, how I want to pick up from there, is to talk about, first of all, the way we handle public information in this country. And I think that is a key point of expenditure, because that informs, government's expenditure going forward. A simple issue is in our labor law, the Minister of Employment is supposed to set up an unemployment office, so that office is responsible for generating data on unemployment. We have been to a number of governments in this country. Where is the unemployment office? Instead of the government spending on social programs like this NAPCO and those things, and giving people jobs that really don't have a sustainability base, if that unemployment office was there, that would be a good starting point for governments to be able to tell which sectors they are targeting their social spending and the type of sustainable jobs that they are providing. That is one part of it. The other, my next closing remark is that the government should also focus some of their spending on maintenance of capital expenditure. Look, if I would even suggest that if a government is really dedicated, they could just spend the next 4 years. They don't need to add so much capital stock to the existing investments that they've made. They should just spend their money maintaining the systems and ensuring that there's efficiency for like the next 4 or 5 years. Keep the roads in good shape. Keep the systems working in good shape. Make sure that people have information. There's no information asymmetry, and give them enough reason to contribute to the economy. We will actually see the type of development that we are looking at. Because building an economy is not just about the number of roads and the number of highways and bridges and things that you have built. Actually, it goes beyond that. You see, economic development is about improving human lives and human welfare, and that actually is not so. It can't be reduced entirely to just capital expenditure and increasing roads and bridges. No, The last point I want to make is that fundamentally we need to rethink the role of the state, because much of these promises that have been made, they have not given, well, personally, after reviewing everything, I really do not see how these promises are examined in light of debt sustainability. Because actually, the debt is a big issue for us as a country. Much of the tax revenue, even though we've spoken about tax revenue, much of the revenue goes to finance already existing debt. And because of the pandemic, the debt levels have increased. The government has had to borrow from the IMF again. In case people are not aware, they should go and check. We have gone for additional loans just to do this COVID. What that actually means is that these loans, some of it are going to be spent by the next government in ensuring that the economy recovers before they will now come to implementing some of these promises that they have mentioned. That debt is already there, is there waiting for our future children to come and pay. So the question is, what type of state do we want to have? Do we want to have a state that is consistently borrowing to finance expenditure and then going back to go and pay his debt? Or we want to have something that is known in the literature as a developmental state? A developmental state puts together ideas and action in a sustainable way.
In a minute, if you can end for us, this would be great. Sorry for
this is my last point. So a developmental state essentially is the one that does the transformation that they are talking about. And I think that is largely what the government should be aiming at. Look, all these other policies, social spending and expenditure, they are all normal. You see that both parties are saying the same thing. There's really nothing new that they are adding onto it. The difference is in how their developmental approach and what they bring to the table that can transform lives. If they focus on that, that is the winning ticket in this case.
All right. Thank you very much. Brilliant submission out there. So in his concluding remark, Mr. Siama says that, just to summarize a few of them, we should be able to manage our public information very well. We should avoid asymmetry of information and then government expenditure. Also pretty much like one of the things he said, know that the government or politicians should not say we want to spend this. You should tell us that you want to take our money and this is what you want to use our money to do, not you want to do this for us, and voters should not be deceived on that. And also one point that I really like is about the maintenance of the capital expenditure. There are so many projects that have been done. If we are able to go back and look at this, he says that if we even do this in 4 years, probably we would be able to reduce our expenditure and in that case, reducing our budget deficit that we always struggle with. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And thank you very much, viewers who followed us. Don't forget that we would also share this on YouTube, and please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you, Mr. Kwabnakra, and thank you, Mr. Rex Esiama. My name is Evan Sapia Kisi. It was CEBSAR Talk, and we hope to meet again next week. Bye-bye.